Today we're going to be fixing a cracked bumper cover. So here on the back of the bumper cover you can see the crack goes down almost halfway through. First thing I'm going to need to do is clean up this edge so we can take epoxy. For that I'm going to be using a rotary tool with a grinding bit. What you really want to do is increase the surface area by grinding a V groove into the crack so that the epoxy holds better. Now I'm going to take a little bit of 40 grit sandpaper and rough up the area around the crack. And next we can use a little bit of acetone or alcohol to clean the crack both on the inside and on the outside. Cleaning the inside. Here's what the surface looks like after it's been sanded and cleaned. Next I'm going to hold the crack closed until it's nice and flush and use a pair of locking pliers to clamp it at the top. Next I'm going to close the crack into place and use a little bit of tape to secure it so it's nice and flush. I got the crack covering the tape and it's nice and flush. Here's what the inside of the crack looks like once it's nice and sealed up on the other side. To fill in this crack I'm going to be using some JB-Weld Plastic Bonder. It's a 2-part mixture that has a 15-minute setting time. So I'm going to mix up my epoxy and fill in the crack. I'm also going to be using a little bit of drywall tape at the back here to make the connection a bit stronger. Alright, so I'm just mixing the epoxy up here. Now I'm going to scoop that and apply it into the crack and put it in nice and smooth. Make sure it fills into the crack. Next I'm going to lay down some of this drywall tape to reinforce it a little bit better. And then on top of the drywall tape I'm going to put another layer of epoxy just to hold it in there nice and well. Alright, so this is what the epoxy looks like with the drywall tape on top of the crack. We're just going to let that sit overnight until it cures and we'll come back in the morning and see how it looks. Alright, so I've let that dry for about 12 hours and you can see the epoxy is nice and hard. And you can remove the clamps. Alright, next I'm going to remove the masking tape so you can see what this crack looks like underneath. You can see the crack is nice and smooth and almost flush. At this point you can just put some touch-up paint on the crack or you can put some filler and spray paint over. Next I'm going to take a little bit of 320 grit sandpaper and rough up the edges around the crack so that the body filler holds better. I'm also going to sand any other places that need to be painted. Next I'm going to use a little bit of paint thinner on a cloth and clean the area nice and well. I'm just mixing up a set of Bondo body filler here. And then I'm going to lightly apply a thin layer to the crack. Alright, once the body filler is dry, I'm next going to sand it with some 80 grit sandpaper. With most of the filler off, I'm going to hit it with a little bit of 320 grit to smoothen it out. With the sanding complete, I'm next going to wipe it down with some paint thinner to make sure there's no grease on any surface before we paint. Next, I'm going to prime the areas that are damaged on the bumper. I'm going to apply my second layer of primer. Now that the primer is dry, next I'm going to wet sand it with some 400 grit sandpaper. Now that I'm finished wet sanding, I'm going to wipe it down with a nice wet rag. Clean everything off. Next I'm going to shoot the paint color. You just want to put on a very light coat because the paint will run. Time for the second coat. Here's what the bumper looks like after it's been painted. It looks really nice and clean. You can only see a small hairline where the crack once was. But other than that, it looks pretty good. Next we're going to install the bumper onto the vehicle. And here's what everything looks like once it's installed on the car. Why are we always left with extra fasteners after finishing a job like this?